What's up? Happy Saturday morning. You're watching Weekends with Kasparian, Nando Vila, that song that slaps. I missed you guys last weekend. Sure you did too, Nando.
I missed you too. I missed you, Anna. I missed our Weekends community. I love every single one of you. Anna, I had a allergic reaction last night and my face swelled up like crazy. So if I look a little puffy, it's because of that. It's not because I'm hungover.
You don't look puffy at all, actually. It's kind of amazing.
I don't?
No, it's so fun. No, not at all. But that's the thing with guys. Like, if I have an allergic reaction or if I'm watching a movie that makes me cry a little bit, you better believe I'll wake up the next morning where like I can barely even open my eyes. What led to the allergic reaction?
It's happened like a couple times in the past year where after exercising, I'll get like an allergic reaction and my face swells up and I look like Quasimodo. I'll send you a picture.
You're allergic to physical activity.
I think I am. It's really disconcerting. This is like a new thing too, because I always work out all the time, and then just in the past since the pandemic, like really, like it's just like I've been working out, and then right after, like I just start. My girlfriend's like, "Dude, something's going on with your face," and I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And then it's just I look in the mirror and I look like Quasimodo. It's crazy.
You should go see a doctor. It might be something other than an allergic reaction. Yeah. But geez. Yeah, I mean, one time I got my dog's like flea medication in my eye because after putting this like topical thing on him, he like decided to go rub his back on my pillow. And so, yeah, like I woke up the next morning with like a giant, like one eye swollen situation.
Wow.
But that's never fun. Yeah, it was really bad. And you know, it's funny because like I'm sure you have health insurance, maybe not. I have health insurance through TYT, and you can go see a doctor, but we just never think to do it. Like we go out of our way to avoid seeing a doctor because of how effed up our healthcare system is. I remember having back pain, like where I couldn't walk. And I finally agreed to go see a doctor. But once I got there, I told the back doctor, orthopedic doctor, just tell me how much this is really going to cost me. What are you going to slap me with in a few weeks? And he's like, $400. You're probably going to pay $400 out of pocket for one like X-ray. But anyway,
I'm already seeing some commenters saying exercise-induced anaphylaxis is a real medical condition. My dad is an immunologist and has patients with it. Well, maybe I should, because it really does feel like an allergic. When it's an allergic reaction, like your lip, you feel it in your lip sometimes or in your tongue. Yeah, it's really weird. But I hope I'm not too puffy today.
No, you look great. You look totally normal. But anyway, let's talk a little bit about let's engage in some banter regarding where our thoughts are regarding the efforts to unionize among Amazon warehouse workers in Bessemer, Alabama. So as most of you know, probably all of you know, Amazon workers in Bessemer, Alabama have been voting to unionize, and voting actually ends tomorrow on Monday. Not tomorrow, 2 days from now on Monday. And we'll find out whether or not this effort to unionize will be a successful one. We've talked about how incredibly important it is for this to actually happen and how it can really galvanize workers across the country, which, by the way, it already has. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But first, I think it's also important to talk about some of the union busting tactics that Amazon has engaged in, including hiring police from Bessemer, Alabama to harass them. And this video details that with more. So let's take a look.
The Bessemer police officers have been here on scene since day one. We feel like we've been harassed. We had cops tell us that we couldn't step off the sidewalk.
When we're on the gates, the police ride around to our checkpoints.
I mean, they're in the parking lot at all times. From the second you pull up like that main entrance, they're generally right there, lights flashing, anywhere from 4 to 5 SUVs like at all times. They're up by the main front entrance. They are walking around the parking lot, oftentimes walking around the facility. They're called for really like the most mild like disturbances, almost as if they're like security in a way. But they're in marked Bessemer police cars.
Some of the officers, they have reported to us that they are there to keep an eye on us. They sit right here at the front gate, and they sit there and watches us the whole time we're here. We had one of our organizers that was working the front gate. The police officer told him that they need a count of every time that we are down here.
We had 2 African-American officers from the Bessemer Police Department. Now, they claim this is private property, but they got public police on site who are enforcing some kind of private rule. I asked them, was it a law? They said no.
I mean, this is a trend that we've seen in so many different, in many different contexts. Using public resources to protect private interests. I mean, that's the main purpose of policing in America today. So it doesn't surprise me at all that Amazon would engage in this. And, you know, we also shared details previously about how they were changing the timing of their stoplights, you know, working essentially with the city to change the timing of the stoplights. So the red lights would be much shorter and union organizers wouldn't have an opportunity to talk to, you know, employees as they were driving into work. It's just absolutely disgusting behavior, but what you would expect.
Yeah, what you would expect. I mean, if you know anything about labor history in this country, you'd know that the cops are often called upon to break strikes, to disrupt organizing efforts, to harass organizers. It happened in the 19th century. It happened in the 20th century. It's happening in the 21st century. We saw, you know, when we talked about the Hunts Point Market strike, the Teamsters strike, we saw cops arresting organizers for no reason. And, you know, what we're seeing in Bessemer is no surprise. I mean, the police are the violent arm of the state, and the state responds to the interests of capital overwhelmingly. So it's no surprise that the police would therefore harass workers trying to organize a union. It's just, this has been one of the more remarkable developments in a long time, I think, for so many reasons. We've talked about it a lot on this show. Be very interesting to see what passes, but it's just it's been interesting to see both the reaction from the administration, the reaction for elected officials. Like, I can't remember an organizing campaign where against a major private company like this, in which so many politicians went down and supported the effort. You know, Bernie Sanders went down, Jamal Bowman went down, celebrities have gone down. Like, when's the last time celebrities got involved in an organizing campaign, a union campaign like this? It's just, you know, it just does feel like maybe this one, you know, not to get your hopes up too much, but like maybe this one could be the start of something. And so we'll see. But I mean, it's been a fascinating couple, especially the last few days, because like Amazon's PR has gotten involved, and it's been hilarious.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it, to be honest. I've enjoyed it because it just shows that they have absolutely no leg to stand on. And even when they try to frame themselves as these like warriors for workers' rights, I mean, they get slapped down so aggressively. And, you know, the series of tweets that some of you may have come across on Twitter were really fueled by the fact that Senator Bernie Sanders, who had pressured Amazon successfully to increase their wages to $15 an hour in 2018, was going to travel to Bessemer, and he did, to, you know, help galvanize the workers there, help with that effort to unionize. And so it starts off with one of their executives, you know, putting out all these ridiculous tweets about like, oh, you know, if you want to hear about, you know, the real progress that we've made in but implementing $15 an hour for our wages, you know, come to Birmingham, you know. But if you want to hear from a loser like Bernie Sanders who couldn't do it himself, well, then you can go to Bessemer. I mean, that was implied. I'm paraphrasing what the tweets were, but it got slapped down pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, well, there's if you've ever been involved in corporate America at any high level and dealt with powerful corporate executives, they often feel like if they could just be unmuzzled for a second, that they could just win over everyone with their incredible talent and brilliance and logic and things like that. They always feel like they're hamstrung and they can't. And so like this felt like a bunch of Amazon executives being like, okay, just give me access to the posting machine. I'll get on there and I'll give these guys a piece of my mind, and they're just gonna kill. Do we have the tweets? Do we have any of the tweets? Because Representative Mark Pocan, who mentioned that Amazon workers often have to urinate in water bottles. Like, the Amazon response was like, you don't really believe the peeing in bottles thing, do you? Which is just so funny from a corporate account. If that were true, nobody would work for us. The truth is we have over 1 million incredible blah, 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 blah. And then, of course, Ken Klippenstein puts out a tweet and he's like, hey, anyone who has any information on the peeing in bottles, like, hit me up. And then like clockwork, the next day he comes out with a story in which he has internal documents. He's got the receipts. He's got the documents, folks, in which it proves that not only are Amazon workers actually peeing in bottles, also pooping in bags and things like that, but that the Amazon executives knew about it and often were reprimanding their employees for doing it. Right. It's just, it's hilarious. I mean, so what Amazon does
to both its warehouse workers and its drivers is give them such a heavy load of work to get done in a single day, in a single 10-hour shift for drivers, for instance. They have to deliver X number of packages. It's a quota. And so that pressure leads to these drivers feeling as though they don't have any time to find a bathroom so they can relieve themselves in a 10-hour shift. And so some of them end up, peeing in bottles or, having to use bags to poo or whatever. And instead of, taking a step back and thinking about how awful that system is for its employees, Amazon decided that they're going to reprimand them instead, not change the number of packages that drivers have to deliver in one shift. And, my husband worked for Amazon recently after losing his job from COVID. He was a bartender previously. And he talked about how difficult it is. I mean, he's in really, really good shape, right? I mean, he was a professional athlete previously. So it was hard for him to get all those packages delivered in one shift. For everyone else, he really noticed people struggling. And so the third party that he worked for that was contracted from Amazon or by Amazon, they had a system in place where if you deliver all your packages before your shift is up, then you got to meet with your other workers and help them deliver their packages as well. And oftentimes everyone was still struggling to get their packages delivered, and it was backbreaking. I mean, think about all of those heavy boxes that you're climbing upstairs. It's awful, absolutely awful. So for Amazon to talk about how wonderful they are to their workers, knowing full well that they're reduced to having to defecate in bags, is just absolutely egregious. And there's no tweet that can, clean that up for them, really.
Yeah, no, it's been a wild week, no doubt, and I hope they do it. I just really hope they do it. It would be just such a sweet victory on so many levels. I just really hope they do it. It would be a crushing defeat if they don't. So I really hope they do. Well, Anna, should we get to the Verso read?
Yeah, I want to hear about some books.
We want to hear about some books. It's been a while. But if you join the Verso Book Club, you get every new ebook that Verso publishes each month, as well as one or more books in the mail. All Verso Book Club members will also get 50% off everything on the website, books and merch, for as long as you are a subscriber. Each member tier is 50% off for your first 3 months. The reader tier is only $5 a month for every ebook published. The Comrade tier is $20 a month. And if you join in March, you'll get Silicon Values, The Future of Free Speech Under Surveillance Capitalism by Gillian C. York. Tomorrow, Sex Will Be Good Again. Women and Desire in the Age of Consent by Catherine Angel. Liberalism at Large, The World According to the Economist by Alexander Zevind. And a new edition of The Emancipated Spectator by Jacques Rancière.
I love it. I also love your Decode segments, where today you're going to call out the profit motive behind the pharmaceutical industry and how disastrous that is when you're dealing with a worldwide pandemic.
Yes, ma'am. All right. Well, guys, I think it's safe to say that the vaccine rollout in the United States has gone better than expected. I mean, at current rates, the US is on target to vaccinate every adult in the country by May. In fact, according to the New York Times, it's going so well that the Biden administration is facing a new problem: what to do with all the excess vaccines. Now, overall, the 10 richest countries in the world are getting an overwhelming amount of the vaccines.
According to the United Nations, 3/4 of all COVID-19 vaccines have been secured by just 10 countries, all of them wealthy. 130 countries, that's about 2.5 billion people, have not received a single dose.
So the US is going to have too many vaccines very soon, while billions of people in the global south are getting none, which makes the issue of how the rest of the world gets vaccines all the more pressing.
Much has been reported about the unequal access to COVID-19 vaccines around the world. The 10 wealthy nations have secured the majority of supplies. Developing countries say part of the problem is that drug makers are controlling production and they're blocking access to information about how they're made. South Africa, India, and more than 100 nations want the World Trade Organization to waive patent restrictions so they can mass produce the vaccines. Well, that's facing opposition from the United States and some European nations where firms, including Pfizer and AstraZeneca, are based. The global vaccine market is estimated to be worth nearly $60 billion a year.
That's right. While the rich countries hoard vaccines, the poorer countries of the global south are asking them to waive the vaccine's intellectual property restrictions so that they can begin manufacturing the vaccines themselves. But the rich countries are blocking them from being able to do that. To be very clear, they are not asking the rich countries to give them any of their vaccines, because I think it's somewhat understandable that politicians like Joe Biden or other European leaders are hesitant to give them out before they know exactly whether they'll need them for boosters and the like for their own population. You can imagine some sort of furious backlash if for some reason they found themselves in a situation where they've given out vaccines to other countries while their own population needs them. But that is not what the global south is asking for. They're asking the rich countries to waive the intellectual property restrictions on the vaccine so that they can manufacture them themselves. Essentially, all they want is access to the instruction booklet for the vaccine. So why the hell would anyone oppose that? Seems like a pretty reasonable ask, right?
But many high-income countries, including the United States and those in the European Union, have rejected the idea. They say waiving the patents would put off private investors and slow down scientific innovation.
Put off private investors or slow down scientific innovation? If that sounds like a bunch of bullshit to you, it's because it is. What that is, my friends, is a nicer way of saying that the rich countries need to protect the profits of these private companies.
Right, but these companies would also say, Max, that while running these types of companies are expensive and without a profit, they're not going to survive. This is simply their business model that's been around for many, many years.
Yes, they would say that. But I think in this case, I would dispute that, but I would also dispute that particularly in this case, all of the leading vaccine candidates have been hugely funded by public money, by taxpayers' money, and that has covered all of the risks of their investment, all the risks of their production. So it's simply not the case that they've risked lots of their money and they need to recoup those profits. And certainly not the levels of profit that we're seeing from the likes of Pfizer and Moderna, between a 60 and 80% profit margin on a vaccine that was based on research that was publicly supported in Germany. Same for Moderna, publicly supported in the US. It's simply not the case that their business model would collapse. And even if it did, why should we put the business model of this one industry ahead of the survival of humanity? If ever there was a reason to question the defense of intellectual property, it is now, and we have to move fast and we have to vaccinate the world, and these companies are simply not stepping up.
That guy from Oxfam is absolutely right. What the US and European governments are doing is totally insane. They're protecting the profits of a few over the health of billions. But you don't even have to go all kumbaya on this. What the rich countries are doing is stupid, even if you look at it from a purely self-interest way. Because even if everyone in the rich world gets vaccinated, while the virus rages on in poorer nations, that is a major problem for the rich world. For starters, we live in a totally globalized economy these days, so crippling large nations like India has a massive effect on global supply chains and global markets. And with regards to the virus itself, we know that allowing it to ravage a large population leads to mutations which will inevitably come back to haunt the rich vaccinated nations. We've already seen new strains in places like Brazil, and it's not exactly clear whether the vaccine can ward off any and all mutations. But of course, without needing to get conspiratorial, that would mean more profits for pharmaceutical companies. And while the vaccine is free right now for all Americans, and even though a huge chunk of the money for the development of the vaccine came from the government, i.e. the taxpayer, i.e. you and me, the pharmaceutical companies absolutely expect to make a healthy profit off of the vaccine, and they are quite open about that. Here is Pfizer's CFO.
As we move from a pandemic state, from a pandemic situation to an endemic situation, normal market forces, normal market conditions will start to kick in. And factors like efficacy, booster ability, clinical utility will, basically become very important. And we view that as, quite frankly, a significant opportunity for our vaccine from a demand perspective, from a pricing perspective, given the clinical profile of our vaccine. So clearly, more to come here. But we think as this shifts from pandemic to endemic, we think there's an opportunity here for us.
And according to Li Feng at The Intercept, those comments you just heard build on a lengthy explanation of the financials of the vaccine laid out during Pfizer's last quarterly earnings call. During the event, Pfizer executives announced that the company's coronavirus vaccine was projected to bring in $15 billion this year alone from sales, of which $4 billion would be purely profit. The estimate would make the Pfizer coronavirus vaccine, according to observers, one of the highest grossing pharmaceutical products of all time. This is no different from war profiteering. It is actually maybe even more heinous. I mean, there are things that the government could do. They could institute price controls to make sure that there are no profits from a vaccine that everybody needs and was financed by public money. But liberal Bay, Dr. Anthony Fauci, scoffed at the idea.
The private sector has been a good partner and not priced vaccines in a way that had made them unaffordable. Yet there are some who want to impose price controls on the products before they're developed. Would such efforts help or hurt your ability to partner with the private sector in bringing new vaccines to market?
So this is what's called get Tony in trouble question.
Those are the fun ones, aren't they?
Yeah, those are the real fun for you. But then when we're done, it's not so much fun for me. No, I mean, I have a lot of experience over the years dealing with pharmaceutical companies in which we're trying to develop an intervention. And the one thing that is clear is that if you try to enforce things on a company that has multiple different opportunities to do different things, they'll walk away. They will walk away. So as much as you'd like to see fair pricing, I think to force something on a company as opposed to work with them to try and get an understanding, particularly if the federal government helps them in the development of a product for a public health issue, that they will in good faith make it available to those groups, countries, nations that really can't afford it very well. You don't want them to be, I mean, obviously it's a profit-driven industry. You people know that a heck of a lot more than I do because I don't deal in that space. I just deal with the people who deal in that space. And when you're dealing with something that has to have some kind of an economic return, you can't just do something and just give it away. You've got to have some degree of profit. And that has to be taken into consideration.
You gotta love it. Well, to heighten the contradictions between the libs and the left, here we have Senator Bernie Sanders.
Well, I believe that a very good way to demonstrate that American values are back is for the United States to play a leading role in facilitating the production and delivery of these life-saving vaccines and in sharing the innovative technologies for producing them. And that is why today I am sending a letter to the Biden administration to support a proposal to waive vaccine-related intellectual property rights at the World Trade Organization, so that we can rapidly expand supplies of vaccines. Ending this pandemic requires collaboration, solidarity, and empathy. It requires a very different mindset, a mindset that puts people over profits at every turn. The pharmaceutical companies must not block this effort, and I join you in your request to temporarily waive WTO intellectual property protections on COVID-19 medical technologies during the pandemic.
Gotta love him. Now, the issue of patent protections in order to bake in profits for life-saving drugs is nothing new. It is a regular occurrence in our capitalist system. The insanity of it is just heightened in moments of genuine crisis, like coronavirus. Or as Lee Phillips points out in Jacobin, the AIDS crisis. He writes, in the mid-1990s, after the deaths from HIV/AIDS had peaked and begun to decline in the developed world thanks to the discovery of antiretroviral medicines, the HIV/AIDS pandemic continued to cripple South Africa, primarily due to the high cost of the drugs, some $10,000 per year per patient. The newly democratic nation was threatening to produce or import generic drugs to combat the disease, but the pharmaceutical industry was steadfastly opposed, and the Clinton administration, whose healthcare policy was at the time overseen by one Hillary Clinton, threatened Pretoria with trade sanctions. Yes, Queen. In 2001, however, after years of campaigning by groups like South Africa's Treatment Action Group, a militant and science-based AIDS activist organization, and of negotiations by developing nations, the Global South finally managed to win an amendment to the World Trade Organization's Agreement on Trade-Related Aspects of Intellectual Property Rights, or TRIPS, the Doha Declaration, which clarified that governments do not have to respect IP protections during public health emergencies. Large pharmaceutical firms have never been happy with this defeat. Over the years, the United States in particular has attempted to restrict the number of medicines the declaration covers, while most developing countries have insisted that all drugs should count. The defense you hear all the time is that the profit motive is needed to encourage industrious scientists and pharmaceutical companies to take risks to develop new drugs. But this is a canard. Life-saving drugs can and should be squarely in the public domain, because the public sector can make decisions about this based on people's needs, not investor profits. The benefits of public medicine are enormous, and as was pointed out earlier, the public sector already spends huge amounts of money, except right now it does it while then allowing private interests to profit. As Dean Baker writes in Jacobin, quote, take biomedical research. The U.S. is already spending more than $30 billion annually through the National Institutes of Health, well over half of what the entire pharmaceutical industry claims it spends on research every year. The NIH funding is overwhelmingly devoted to basic research, but it has also underwritten the development of drugs and paid for clinical trials. There is no reason why public funding could not be expanded and used to pay for later phases of research and clinical testing. The new drugs could then be sold at generic prices. Now, while the Biden administration blocked a temporary waiver of the so-called trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights, or TRIPS, at the last WTO meeting about it, there is another TRIPS meeting in June, and there have been some reports that the rich countries are open to discussing it with the South African and Indian delegations in April, ahead of the meeting. But reporting from Li Fang at The Intercept revealed some pretty stunning financial ties between many of Biden's top administration officials and the pharmaceutical industry. He writes, quote, in the coming months, Linda Thomas Greenfield, President Joe Biden's ambassador to the United Nations, will hear from a growing chorus of developing nations about the foundering efforts to distribute the coronavirus vaccine globally. The nations, many of which have not even begun vaccinating their populations, are demanding that the U.S. support proposals to temporarily waive certain patent and intellectual property rights so that generic coronavirus vaccines can be produced. The proposals have been fiercely opposed by American drug makers, including Pfizer, a pharmaceutical giant that Thomas Greenfield's former consulting firm has recently counted as a client. Thomas Greenfield and her number two, Jeffrey De Laurentiis, previously worked for the Albright Stonebridge Group, or ASG, a consulting firm founded by former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright. The firm, which represents Pfizer, specializes in helping large corporations understand the influence of international trade policy, including on intellectual property. Now, it doesn't stop with just the UN ambassador, Linda Thomas Greenfield. there's plenty of other Biden officials who have ties to the pharmaceutical industry. One is Anita Dunn, the leading strategist on Biden's presidential campaign, who now serves as the White House advisor, is on leave from her job as managing partner at the consulting firm she co-founded, SKDK, which provides extensive public relations and advertising services to Pfizer. Dunn intends to return to the SKDK this summer. SKDK, which did not respond to requests for comment, has continued to promote Pfizer's vaccines on social media. Susan Rice, the domestic policy advisor, holds up to $5 million in shares on Johnson & Johnson, and up to $50,000 in shares of Pfizer, according to disclosure made public this week. Eric Lander, the White House advisor, holds up to $1 million in shares in BioNTech, Pfizer's partner for its coronavirus vaccine. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, blah, 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 all of these other people, they all have financial ties to the pharmaceutical industry. Now, this goes to show the nature of the state under capitalism. It is built to protect private profits before anything else. And the ideology of profits as a sort of immutable law of science is so deeply ingrained that even the likes of Dr. Anthony Fauci see it as just some obvious assumption. Challenging it is tantamount to wishing that the sky were green. It's never going to happen. But we must challenge these assumptions. The American state in particular is notorious for outsourcing things that should squarely belong in the public sector, from medicines to weapons manufacturing to even prisons, to private interests. Now, this is really just a way to funnel money away from you and I to a handful of obscenely wealthy investors and shareholders. As Rahm Emanuel said, you shouldn't let a good crisis go to waste. And in a way, the COVID-19 pandemic is an opportunity to expose just how rotten and evil our system is. It is a system that would let billions suffer under a horrible pandemic just to protect the profits of a few.
And Nando, based on the video that you shared of Anthony Fauci, Fauci knows that. And rather than challenge the assumptions that you were talking about, he not only accepts it, but seems to have like disdain for anyone who dare challenge or question it. And it's really important to point that out, as, you know, he's really put on this pedestal as someone who cares about getting the correct information to people so they can protect themselves during the pandemic. Now, while that might be true, the very structure of our healthcare system, the fact that we've commodified pharmaceutical drugs, we've commodified healthcare, is something that, you know, is the main problem in combating this pandemic, and he's unwilling to challenge that. But Fauci is one person. Really, what we see is an entire establishment, an entire political system that continues to make excuses for something that is not just, it's not humane, right? We know that, but it's not even logical, as you pointed out, right? It makes no sense, especially when you're dealing with a global pandemic. And, you know, we keep hearing these news reports about variants. Where do you think the variants come from? It comes from this virus mutating and turning into something that could be far more difficult to treat, far more difficult to vaccinate against. And so, you know, whenever you hear about the logic in a capitalist system, the logic behind commodifying everything and how the market will make the necessary corrections, understand that the logic that they're talking about isn't the logic that looks out for the common good or for the public's interest. It's logic that might lead to more costs. It might lead to more deaths, but it certainly does positively impact the bottom line for these investors and for these executives. That's it. That's the only place the logic lies.
Yeah, the Anthony Fauci clip was pretty stunning to me. I mean, because like here he is, this doctor, scientist guy, pandemic expert, whatever, and he's like weighing in on the economics around the vaccine. I mean, it's something that it just like washes over him like water. It's just he understands it as just this thing that is inevitable. Like, what are you talking about? Like, these people who even like consider any alternatives are just ridiculous. And, you know, I thought it was interesting because this week, Joe Biden gave his first press conference, I guess, or like in a long time or since becoming president or whatever. And like the media,
it was his first,
yeah, his first one. And the media had been like chomping at the bit to like, you know, do their role as like, you know, gatekeepers and holding the powerful accountable and whatever. And they were like making a big stink about Joe Biden not giving any press conferences and blah, 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 blah. So the media finally gets their chance. And did you know that they didn't ask a single question about COVID? Not a single question about COVID was asked. I thought that maybe someone might ask about this, and I was like looking for maybe like how Joe Biden would respond to this idea that the United States is protecting the intellectual property rights of private healthcare companies in at the expense of billions of people around the world. And yeah, no one asked about that. No one asked about any COVID related matters. They asked a ton of questions about whether he was going to run again in 2024. It's just like if there was ever any more perfect example of just how awful and stupid and broken political journalism has become in this country, like this case, like where we're living in the middle of a historic crisis, a historic pandemic, and the media has no idea to even ask one question about it.
Right. No, you're right.
It's absolutely crazy.
Yeah. And look, they ask about the horse race because politics for corporate reporters, corporate journalism is nothing more than a blood sport, right? It's nothing more than some reality show drama that they need to immediately start discussing as soon as an election ends, right? They're already focusing on what's going to happen 4 years from now, which is ridiculous. But the other thing that they were talking about or asking incessant questions about had to do with the immigration issue, the fact that you have all these unaccompanied minors showing up to the border, looking to come into the United States. And they kept, the framing of their questions kept trying to goad him into committing to deporting unaccompanied minors. It was kind of amazing. Yeah. He answered the question a million times. But what I found fascinating is, even with the incessant questioning about immigration, not a single one of them talked about how foreign policy, or asked about how Biden proposes to tackle the crisis through maybe rethinking U.S. foreign policy, right? Because the fact of the matter is he's just engaging in a continuation of the failed U.S. foreign policy that has led to the migrant crisis that we're experiencing at the border right now. I know that's a little bit of a tangent, but I agree with you. The questioning was ridiculous.
Ridiculous. I hate them so much. I hate political journalists so much. They're 99% of them are just awful, truly awful. And there's 1% that are okay, and maybe 0.00001% who are actually good. It's really it's really just such an indictment on our industry, the industry that you and I work in. It's crazy.
Gotta bring that fairness doctrine back. And by the way, a lot of people who watch this show have been asking me for that clip of that segment that I did, which is interesting. I didn't think it would get as much attention as it has, but it's on the Jacobin YouTube channel. Just go through it, you'll see it, and share it far and wide, because the corporate media is part of the problem. There's no question.
Yes.
All right. And by the way, share this stream. If you're watching this live, please do that. It's a really great way to help grow the audience for this show and this channel. And, we put a lot of work behind it, a lot of research behind it. And it would be great to get more people to watch and learn about what's really going on behind the scenes with these major issues. Speaking of which, let's talk about Biden and what we've seen from his presidency so far. But more importantly, the way that his performance, for lack of a better word, as president has been reported about in the media, and what we could maybe expect from him moving forward. So, President Joe Biden's success in passing the latest $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief bill was met with comically hyperbolic language and liberal punditry regarding his supposed pivot toward Franklin Delano Roosevelt-style economic reforms. For example, Slate's Jordan Weissman wrote that Biden's COVID bill is his first step toward an FDR-style presidency. And look, it's not difficult to understand how exaggerated that statement is, considering how the $15 an hour minimum wage debacle unfolded, that debate abruptly ended with the Biden administration's refusal to overrule a non-elected Senate parliamentarian who recommended taking the minimum wage hike out of the bill. So to say that this is his first step toward FDR-style, economic reforms is pretty ridiculous. And it's particularly loathsome that minimum wage hasn't been increased since 2009. Yet Biden and the Democratic leadership couldn't muster enough of a fight to do something about it, to make sure that that provision was included in the final bill. And so I give you that example because it just shows you how, in terms of systemic change, in terms of permanent change, that relief bill did not deliver. And there was really no reason for Biden or the Democrats to hold back from any of these provisions, because when you look at polling, the vast majority of Americans across the political spectrum were supportive of these provisions, right? Including, yes, the $15 an hour minimum wage. As Matt Karp wrote in a wonderful Jacobin piece, you should check out the full article for yourselves. He writes that even as Senate Republicans dutifully held the line against Biden's bill, their own constituents had already abandoned the fight. 70% of Republican voters support direct payments of $1,400 or larger, while 60% support the overall $1.9 trillion rescue plan. Even one of the most revolutionary features of the Biden bill, a direct federal allowance for children, claims 60% support from Republicans. And that's certainly something that Biden and the Democratic Party should keep in mind as they claim they're going to fight to make that child tax credit permanent. For now, it is not. It expires by the end of 2021. Now, does this all mean that there's no hope left for Biden to actually accomplish, some of the progressive agenda items that people have been pushing for? To be honest, it's hard to tell, although Biden did unexpectedly show support for Bessemer, Alabama, Amazon warehouse workers who are working to unionize. This was something that was unexpected because in modern times at least, there hasn't been a sitting president who has said anything as supportive toward a unionizing effort or labor. Take a look.
Today and over the next few days and weeks, workers in Alabama and all across America are voting on whether to organize a union in their workplace. This is vitally important, a vitally important choice as America grapples with the deadly pandemic, the economic crisis, and the reckoning on race. What it reveals the deep disparities that still exist in our country. And there should be no intimidation, no coercion, no threats, no anti-union propaganda. No supervisors should confront employees about their union preferences. Every worker should have a free and fair choice to join a union. The law guarantees that choice. And it's your right, not that of an employer. It's your right. No employer can take that right away. So make your voice heard.
And look, obviously, issuing a statement is very different from successfully passing legislation that empowers workers, actual systemic change. However, I think that it would be a mistake to minimize how much a statement like that can galvanize workers, not only in Bessemer, Alabama, but certainly workers across the country. In fact, Mindy Eiser writes in Jacobin that it was arguably the most pro-union statement a U.S. president has made in decades. And so, sure enough, after Biden made that statement and after the efforts in Bessemer, Alabama got a little more attention, you will notice that there are workers across the country, Amazon workers in other facilities across the country, now considering a union. So we're talking about Baltimore, New Orleans, Portland, Denver, Iowa, and in Southern California as well. Bloomberg reports that the Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union, which is leading the drive in Bessemer, Alabama, says it has heard from 1,000 Amazon workers around the country. So this is great news. Also, one warehouse worker spoke to Bloomberg and said this: If the most powerful company in the world can be unionized in an anti-union state like Alabama, it gives hope to people in Louisiana, in Mississippi, and West Virginia who are trying to do the same thing. We just have to support the fight wherever it's at, because the fight is going to come to us. I absolutely love that statement, and it's true. And so Biden being on the right side of that issue does have an impact. And it would be wrong to not also give other lawmakers, Democratic lawmakers, credit for drawing attention to that effort. Bernie Sanders, for instance, recently traveled to Bessemer, Alabama, along with Killer Mike, in order to help galvanize the efforts in Bessemer as well. So this all has an impact, and I'm glad that Biden at least said the right things. And then there's also the pro-labor bill that Biden has also supported, and he's called it's called the Protecting the Right to Organize Act, or the PRO Act. Nando did a great lengthy segment giving you all the details about that, but it was important for Biden to come out and support that. It would strengthen collective bargaining rights, override so-called right to work laws, establish new penalties for corporations that violate workers' rights, and prohibit employers from taking action against unions, striking in solidarity with workers at other companies. So it would be a wonderful sweeping labor rights bill. And again, Biden has come out in favor of it. In fact, urging the Senate to vote on the legislation. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has even vowed to bring it to a floor vote in the Senate as soon as he has secured 50 votes. So far, he's reported that 45 lawmakers in the Senate are willing to vote in favor of that legislation. But look, we're talking about the PRO Act. We're talking about progressive legislative goals, and that's all fine and dandy. But we're not going to get anywhere unless we have a real discussion about nuking that filibuster, the legislative filibuster in the Senate, which forces the Democratic Party to get as many as 10 Republican senators to vote along with them in order to pass that type of legislation. We know that that Senate filibuster is trash. We know that its very intention is a racist one in order to prevent the passage of civil rights. And so Democrats need to stop kind of tiptoeing around that issue. And the real question is Biden willing to push the Democrats to either reform or throw out that legislative filibuster? Well, he was asked about that during his first presidential press conference. Here's what he had to say.
It used to be you had to stand there and talk and talk and talk and talk until you collapsed. And guess what? People got tired of talking and tired of collapsing. Filibusters broke down and we were able to break the filibuster, get a quorum and vote. So I strongly support moving in that direction, in addition to having an open mind about dealing with certain things that are just elemental to the functioning of our democracy, like the right to vote, like the basic right to vote. We've amended the filibuster in the past. But here's the deal. As you observed, I'm a fairly practical guy. I want to get things done. I want to get them done consistent with what we promised the American people. And in order to do that, in a 50-50 Senate, we've got to get to the place where I get 50 votes so that the Vice President of the United States can break the tie, or I get 51 votes without her. And so I'm going to say something outrageous. I have never been particularly poor at calculating how to get things done in the United States Senate. We're going to get a lot done. And if we have to, if there's complete lockdown and chaos as a consequence of the filibuster, then we'll have to go beyond what I'm talking about.
So again, Biden is saying a lot of the right things. He's saying he's willing to challenge the filibuster. He's saying that he's in favor of workers unionizing. He says he's in favor of the passage of the PRO Act. All of the rhetoric coming from Biden sounds great. And the media, corporate media, has really latched on to that rhetoric as a way of proving that he's pivoting toward FDR-style economic reforms. Now, one of the things that really stood out was a piece written by Axios, And it disclosed the fact that Biden had this secret meeting with historians because he wanted to figure out, well, how big should I go? How far should I go? And should I model my presidency after FDR's presidency? At least that's the framing that you'll notice in the Axios article that I'm talking about. They write that the historians' views were very much in sync with Biden's. It's time to go even bigger and faster than anyone expected. If that means chucking the filibuster and bipartisanship, so be it. Now, look, it's important to avoid making too much of Axios's interpretation of Biden's intentions, especially when it comes to progressive policies. But with that in mind, the article also adds that one of the historians who met with him said that FDR and LBJ may turn out to be the past century's closest analogs for the Biden era in terms of transforming the country in important ways in a short time. So there's a lot that Biden allegedly wants to accomplish through a $3 trillion infrastructure and jobs bill. And so the real test is what that bill will include. Although I will say, as we hear the preliminary details of that legislation, it's already clear that it's not going to go nearly far enough to be anywhere on the same level as what FDR managed to do with his New Deal. But with that said, let's take a look at what we do know so far about what this infrastructure bill will include.
Within the next couple of days, President Biden's economic advisors are going to be briefing him on a proposal that they say will create jobs. And it involves spending about $1 trillion reportedly on improvements to roads, bridges, even the cellular network. That's the physical infrastructure piece. And then more money would go to investments like free community college, universal pre-K, and paid family leave. They call that human infrastructure.
Now, there are some good proposals, good provisions from, at least what we're hearing regarding the preliminary negotiations. Keep in mind that Buttigieg is involved in all of this, and that should be worrying. But aside from that, what we know is that it's unlikely to include free public college, just possibly free community college. And there's still no real conversation being had about canceling student loan debt. So already there are some issues. The Sunrise movement came forward and said that it doesn't do enough in spending and investing in renewable energies, which I think, based on what we know so far, is true. But what the media is doing is they're now kind of pitting Biden against Obama to kind of get everyone's hopes up about how Biden's going to be different. He's going to be bolder. He's going to go bigger. Now, keep in mind that we're dealing with a much bigger economic crisis now than we did even after the Great Recession. But the whole point here is, Biden wants to differentiate his leadership from, the failures that you might have experienced during the Obama administration in responding to the recession. In fact, Axios says that Biden loves the growing narrative that he's bolder and bigger thinking than President Obama. So if you just, tap into Biden's ego, maybe he'll do the right thing. And party leaders, by the way, from President Biden on down, they write, are citing Obama's strategy on his most urgent policy initiative, an $800 billion financial rescue plan in 2009 in the midst of a crippling recession, as too cautious and too deferential to Republicans, mistakes they were determined not to repeat. And then they also write in The Hill that others in Biden's circle have argued that the Obama stimulus was too small, an error the current administration was adamant it would not make as it forged ahead with a $1.9 trillion COVID-19 relief package. And look, the good news is they're aware of the mistakes made, the terrible decisions made during Obama's administration. The question is, are they willing to really go in a completely opposite direction? And so far, what we've seen is no. And it's important for you to keep that in mind, because we're talking about actual structural changes here, not another Band-Aid on a gushing wound. But to be fair, the criticisms that they're putting out there regarding the Obama administration, especially about his reaction or response to the recession, is accurate.
In a development that pleased many Republicans, Mr. Obama wants more tax cuts than had been expected. Of the total stimulus, now at about $775 billion, he wants 40% of that, about $300 billion, to go to tax cuts, about half of that for business. For example, allowing companies to write off losses incurred during this recession and giving businesses a tax credit for hiring new workers. As for individuals, all but the wealthiest would get an immediate tax cut of $500, for families, $1,000. His team was encouraged by early reactions from Republicans to the idea of tax cuts.
Clearly, it's an area that brings excitement to Republicans because it does put money in the economy right away.
Republican sources on Capitol Hill say Mr. Obama went out of his way today to make clear he will continue to listen to Republicans.
And what did those tax cuts and all those concessions to Republicans lead to? Well, take a look at what the end result was.
While Americans suffered under an economic crisis, Wall Street was kept intentionally healthy and stable to avoid further decline. In fact, although President Obama campaigned on battling inequality, economically the wealth gap grew during his time in office.
And look, this is a little bit of a side note, but now with Biden and some of his aides openly talking about the fact that Obama didn't do enough to respond to the recession, you have people like Rahm Emanuel getting super salty about it, saying things like this to the New York Times. It's really about Obama versus Bush and Biden versus Trump, not the other way around. We built long-lasting, robust economic growth, he thinks. And I think comparing one to the other is historically not accurate. And also, more importantly, it's strategically not advantageous. I would disagree with Rahm Emanuel. I think that it's incredibly advantageous for the Biden administration to take a good, hard look at the failures of the Obama administration and actually respond to the economic crisis we're in appropriately. Now, again, the question is, can we expect that from the Biden administration? And to be quite honest with you, it's really hard to just expect Biden to do the right thing based on his own ego or based on a rivalry that he has with the former president, Obama. I think what you should really focus on is the real two competing interests at play here, because we already saw how these competing interests, played out during the stimulus bill, during the relief bill, the $1.9 trillion bill that some corporate journalists think was a sign of how Biden is just like FDR. The truth is, this is about private interests versus public interests, right? Versus the public's interests. And unfortunately, what's missing right now is that while corporate interests and private interests reign supreme, workers, unfortunately, people who would bear to, actually benefit the most from a robust economic policy are not organized. And so what was it like to actually push for FDR's New Deal? It was actually pretty bloody. And Jane McAlevey talks about that in this next clip.
So FDR comes in 32 election, 33. He comes into power, 25% unemployment. The conditions were really horrible in this country, and nothing was changing right away. He begins to do a bunch of stuff in the first 100 days, but he doesn't really get to meaningful trade union policy. He doesn't actually formalize and legalize what we call the collective bargaining process until the National Labor Relations Act, which happens in the summer of 1935.
Officially called the National Labor Relations Bill, it provides supervised union elections in industrial plants. It creates a judicial board to weigh disputes between labor and management.
The National Labor Relations Act is now the law of the land. We shall see the dawn of a new era of peace and justice for all in our economic life.
It took massive, unruly, messy, bloody, brutal strikes to win the passage of the National Labor Relations Act in 1935. And that's often just written out of history. It's like airbrushed out. So when we think about the New Deal era, what people talk about are the strikes that began in 1936 and 1937, which was the sit-down strikes, the big Flint strikes in the auto sector. And I keep trying to point out to people, those strikes to me, they mattered a lot. But the strikes that got us to those strikes, the strikes that got to the passage of the Wagner Act, which is the National Relations Act of 1935, were strikes that literally have just been airbrushed out. There were massive strikes in 33 and 34 and the beginning of 35. And those strikes created an untenable crisis that allowed FDR to come in and say, whoa, we got to do something here because they're going to pitchfork the place down.
So again, I mean, I'm not calling for a bloody, situation, but the fact of the matter is victories have to be fought for and won. And in this case, just relying on and appealing to Biden's ego is not going to go far enough to overwhelm the corporate interests at play here. And, the company, the umbrella or parent company for many of the fast food companies out there, known as Inspire Brands, has put out a memo bragging about the fact that they successfully defeated efforts to increase the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour. At the end of the day, what has the most sway and influence, again, is corporate power. And the only way that we can get lawmakers, whether it's in the executive branch or Congress, to serve our best interests is to make them bend to our will, to ensure that we have a seat at the table. And the only way that you can do that is through organized labor. History bears that out. And it's definitely something that should take more of the focus as opposed to personalities and what Biden's ego entails. Nando. You're muted.
Yeah, no, it was just that whole segment was making me think about Robert Caro's books on LBJ, which I know you are a fan of as well, because I think we often make the mistake of trying to figure out what is inside a person's mind or heart, and obviously people are complicated and it's impossible to really fully understand that. LBJ, who was oversaw huge progressive wins. Policy changes in the 1960s, civil rights, Medicare, things like that. He wouldn't have lifted a finger for any progressive thing if it meant any sort of risk to his own political power. He only did those things to the extent that it enhanced his political power, and that was due to conditions on the ground, in sort of historic, just material conditions, like in the country at the time. And with Biden, who, we know who he is. He's the least kind of mysterious creature in politics because he's been around forever. He would never do anything for progressive policy if it meant risking his own political power. But it seems like there might be some sort of positive feedback loop in which, if he does kind of these big, bold, progressive things, he might sense that it enhances his political power in some meaningful way. And to the extent that that's true, yeah, good.
Yeah, no, you definitely. And I think that the person in his ear about that is Senator Sanders. I think that what's happening behind the scenes is he's influencing Biden in the best possible way. But I still don't think that's enough because you have Senator Sanders competing with corporate interests. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, but the other thing that your segment made me think of was Obama and just how every month that goes by, his presidency looks worse and worse and worse because at the time he inherited this enormous economic crisis and more crucially, just a huge amount of public discontent and rejection of Republicans and the Bush administration and things like that, and huge groundswell of grassroots support and all that stuff. His role, his effect, I don't know, nor do I care what's in his heart. I suspect he's a striving psychopath like every major American politician. But his actual effect was to absorb all that energy and diffuse it, to tamp it down, to do everything possible to not encourage any of that. Just truly sick stuff, and the effects of his presidency were just so disastrous in contributing to the sense of cynicism in this country, because he was such this, presented himself and was in many ways in 2008 this kind of transformative figure, right? The first black president, blah blah blah, and the actual effects of his administration, which were nothing, just a continuation of the status quo, contributed to like this enormous sense of cynicism that everyone feels. Like that was a moment that felt we could change something, that everyone was kind of activated, that everyone was excited, and and there was this guy who sounded different from all the other politicians and looked different from all the other politicians, and then blah blah blah, and then he turned out to just be an empty psycho like everyone else. And it just, like, I can't stop thinking about that, just how as time goes on, the Obama presidency looks worse and worse and worse. And I reckon that 100 years from now, if there is still in America, and historians are like looking back at these presidents, and they do like their little presidential rankings, like Obama's going to keep falling and falling and falling in that ranking. Like he just sucks. Like, and he just sucked. He sucked then and he sucks now, I guess is my point.
Yeah, and it is interesting to see, Chuck Schumer, for instance. He was on the record, like he gave a press conference where he was pretty critical of Obama's response to the recession, which, it does feel like Monday night quarterbacking or whatever it is that they call it. But especially since Schumer's like not new to Congress, like, come on. But at the same time, I mean, I think you're right. Like you have people who worked for Obama aides, loyalists to him, coming out and getting super angry about Biden or any of his aides, criticizing Obama's approach. And they think that it's going to hurt Biden. They genuinely think like Obama's such a popular former president that you're really hurting yourself in pointing out Obama's mistakes. But I mean, I couldn't disagree with that more. I think that people don't just know, they felt in their personal lives how awful that response to the recession was. I mean, think about the number of foreclosures that took place. And then you have these, investment companies and banks come in, snatch up all of those homes and turn them into rental properties. Which has led, it's been part of what's led to a housing crisis in the country. So Obama, you're right. I think as people analyze Obama's presidency and take a closer look to what actually happened through his lack of economic reforms, they'll see that he doesn't deserve the popularity that he might have right now in the polls. But I want to hear what Matt Christman has to say about the Biden presidency so far. So let's bring him in. Joining us now is Matt Christman from Chapo Trap House. What's up, Matt? How are you?
Good. How are you guys?
Good. I know you've been patiently waiting to come on, and you probably heard what we were talking about with, Joe Biden and how the media is trying to really really present him as someone who's moving toward FDR style economic reforms.
Yes.
What's your
He's
thought on that?
FDR pilled, I heard.
Right.
I mean, they're using what they have to sell a product. I mean, they have this guy in there now whose victory was a triumph for the Democratic establishment, shorn of any pretense that it represented anything other than the continuation of the existing power there. I mean, not only, of course, was it did it take the entire Democratic Party to come together to defeat the Bernie Sanders insurgency, but the person of Biden being president throws all of the things they were saying, Democrats were saying about the necessity for inclusion and diversity at the top of the ticket, and sexual assault, Me Too. All of those were thrown away and discarded to get this guy across the finish line. And now he's there, so they have to have a narrative to keep people invested in this thing because honestly, at this point, I think for a lot of these political journalists, it's not even really about manufacturing consent among some group of people. I mean, the people who care about politics are pretty much stuck caring about this stuff, like the same way you're stuck caring about your favorite sports team. I think it's really more about them convincing themselves that they have not signed off on a totally cynical power projection here, that this is a real project that they're a part of, and that their job is to disabuse the cynicism of naysayers. But really, they're just talking to themselves, it seems like, more than anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's been remarkable just how quickly all of the kind of woke selling points for Democrat leaders and stuff like that has just gone by the wayside with Biden. This obviously like incredibly like unwoke guy. Like, you know, if you, when that funny clip when someone asked him how many genders there are, and he said at least 3, which is one of the greatest moments in the history of campaigning.
That shows that he's still a pro, even though his mind is in a twilight state. He's still a pro because he clearly has no idea about any of this gender stuff. But he got some sort of prep from some young staffer to let him know, whatever you do, do not say there's 2 genders. And so he figured, okay, that means minimum of 3. But beyond that, he wasn't going to try to outkick his coverage. It was it shows that he's still got a few flashes left.
Yeah, it's like you know he's technically not wrong, I guess. You know, or in a way. What do you make of the situation in Bessemer and the Amazon PR tweets? Like, I guess for lack of a better term, I mean they're kind of very public. I don't know. I don't know what to call it. Was it a meltdown or what the hell was going on?
I guess just an attempt to. I mean, it is baffling to see because it does seem like it would not be in their best interests to appear that truculent and combative when talking to senators and stuff. But I mean, more than anything, it probably just speaks to Amazon's sense of invulnerability. They are now like the economy, basically, especially since the pandemic began. They're in a position where they're going to be able to just sort of vertically integrate the entire American economy under their umbrella. And with that the case, maybe they're just sick of humoring these politicians who really everyone knows can only really sort of flex and posture about this stuff, that they don't really have any will or ability to rein in Amazon in any meaningful sense. And so at a certain level, you must just get bored and annoyed with having to pretend that they actually are interested in doing any of that. So I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens in Bessemer, certainly. If there is a successful union drive there, if it leads to other places unionizing, and how Amazon's going to respond to that. I mean, a lot of this also, of course, is keyed into the PRO Act, which to me is the real indicator of like the likelihood of transformative change occurring through legislation, because the stuff that people have been ballying as you know FDR 2 so far is really just more money sort of thrown around to people without challenging any underlying structures of power. Whereas the PRO Act would actually change the relationship between labor and capital for the first time in 40 years, which is why I have a hard time imagining that it will actually pass. And if it doesn't, I think that Amazon is probably right to think that they can really say whatever they want and not have to worry too much about the consequences.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right about that. You know, and you're right. I mean, it's interesting because I don't know if there's an actual misunderstanding of what the difference is between what Biden's doing and what FDR managed to accomplish through the New Deal. But it seems to me that journalists think that, oh, just increasing the amount of money that Biden is willing to throw at a problem is the same thing as what FDR did. But it wasn't just simply the spending. It was empowering workers. It was actual systemic change that empowered workers. And Biden so far hasn't accomplished anything close to that. But he has said that he's in favor of the passage of the PRO Act. And, you know, Chuck Schumer came out and said that he's secured 45 votes in the Senate for it. And as soon as he has 50 votes, he's going to bring it to the floor for a vote in the Senate. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, 45 is nice, but that's one of the geniuses of the Senate, and one of the reasons that it is so integral to our system is that it is where change can go to die, and where blame for that can be dispersed away from any responsible position. So even if the position of the actual leadership of the Democratic Party is that the PRO Act is a bridge too far and that they don't want to see it pass, the Senate allows them to allow process to fill in for that. And the reality of having, Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema in the Senate to stand in for the actual reason that this stuff doesn't get passed, which is that the party is structurally beholden to capital and hostile to workers at this point. And I could see them saying 45 votes all they want, and I'll believe it when I see it. It just seems highly unlikely.
I wanted to ask you about The Republic for Which It Stands, the book you've been doing kind of a sort of reading, live reading series on, because it focuses on America in the second half of the 19th century. Matt Karp also just wrote a long piece in Jacobin comparing our current moment to the political moment of the 1880s. Why are you interested in that era? What does it have to say about, why is that era? Why are the 1880s so hot right now? What's going, why are we partying like it's 1888?
Well, I think that the piece that you refer to that Matt Karp wrote gets at one of the most important parts of that, which is that the current model of politics that we have is one that dominated that era, where you have wild polarization between the parties, deep party loyalty, but a lack of actual class coherence to that. Like the Democrats and Republicans of the Gilded Age were coherent, coherent parties that had discipline and structures of control and had mass bases. But even though the working class at that point was starting to emerge as a coherent block of interest within the American political system, they had the two parties essentially divided the working class by geography, basically. If you were a northern urban worker, you were a Democrat. If you were a southern white of any kind, you were a Democrat. If you were a southern black of any kind, you were a Republican. And if you were a northern farmer or someone who didn't live in a big city, you were a Republican. And that meant that even though we had all of the high stakes and drama and conflict of a robust democratic system, at the top of both parties, the agenda of the emerging robber baron class was just being unquestionably processed and promoted, and that is when we get the full corporatification of American politics. The Civil War really created the context for capital to essentially finance capital to fully invest American power, and they were able to do it over the course of the Gilded Age because politics was, while it was robust and high turnout, it was devoid of a class basis. And we are in that situation now, where we have these two parties that are that have robust internal networks, robust brand associations, but where the class basis is divided by geography and a cultural ideology that's generated by that geography. So it's essentially looking at the past to see a similar structure and what challenged it and how it changed, and trying to apply any of that to the current moment, I think.
Yeah, that sounds like a good reason to look to that era. I wish there was more focus on that as opposed to, what we're seeing right now regarding political discourse, at least on social media, which proves to me that there's really more of an emphasis on cults of personality within Congress and trying to decipher whether or not any one lawmaker is progressive enough or leftist enough, or what's in their heart. Are they going to do the right thing? It appears that like that has become the beginning and end of all political analysis right now. And so how do we get past that? Because it's not really about what's in any particular lawmaker's heart, right? This is a question about power dynamics. And unfortunately, there's very little power in unorganized labor. How do you get past all of the obstacles that we're noticing right now with like identity politics playing a role, with personality, cult of personality narratives playing out in social media? How do we get past all of that and focus on what actually matters, which is getting people to join forces, organize together for their common interests?
I mean, I've been saying on my streams and on the show for a while now that you have to stop caring so much about this as a spectacle. Like what you say about investing in the true beliefs, the true intentions of members of Congress. Like, is AOC your friend or not? It very much is just celebrity culture transformed to politics, and it is a result of our awareness of our powerlessness. If we are not going to be able to dictate terms to those in power, then their decisions are fully up to their own discretion. But what that ignores is that if you're in Congress, if you have run to be a member of, certainly in the federal government, you have likely constructed a edifice of ideology that can accommodate any number of decisions, any number of choices, and then justify them to yourself based on what is best for you. Because, I mean, you wouldn't be doing that. You wouldn't be running for Congress if you did not have ambition. And so the intent of the heart is truly beside the point. What matters is the incentive structure that the politicians are going to be beholden to. And so the answer, sadly, isn't anything that can be prescribed, because it lies closer to the conditions of life and away from the firmament of politics. And I'd say the first step, and it is a small one, but I think a necessary one, seeing how deeply emotional and overwhelming these arguments seem to be for people, is to reduce one's emotional investment in politics above the level of the local, because the ability of the people in any sense outside of capital formations to influence meaningfully government at that level is so low that you're really just trying to psychically push things in one direction or another. And there's almost an unspoken assumption that if you will it, if enough people think enough about something, it'll actually like spin the dial. But in reality, it's going to be much slower, more tedious, and more locally based than anything. Like, that's why I'd say that the Bessemer union action in Alabama is far more important than anything happening in Washington right now, because it's something that people are doing in their lives and has the chance to create structures of solidarity and action that can be replicated elsewhere. Nothing that we say to politicians, no amount of tweeting or even phone calls or emails to politicians is going to overcome the structural incentives of power. The power has to be built at the grassroots.
Yeah, and part of that, this phenomenon that or one of the manifestations that we're seeing from this kind of polarization, sort of seemingly like our politics is stuck and there's not a lot of avenues for people, is you see a lot of people who are not kind of on the left or whatever, trying to find common cause with the so-called like right-wing populists. Sometimes they call themselves post-left, whatever. What do you make of that whole phenomenon? Like, I guess I see like the like, they see the libs, they see the Democrats, and they're like, well, we can't do that. So they try to find something. But what do you make of that whole phenomenon?
I think what it is people recognize the limitations of posting as praxis within the Democratic party because they saw what happened with Bernie. They saw, oh, we're really only talking to ourselves, and we don't actually have any power over this structure because it is fully determined by capital. But they don't want to take the next step to say, okay, well then posting as praxis is a dead end entirely. The fantasy of like a reaching out, whatever this means, reaching out in what sense? You're literally just talking about like what, retweeting each other, posting together. None of these people, none of these forces have any actual influence, power, or represent any real concentration of people. There's no coordination at any level of within these formations. I mean, none of them represent anybody. None of them represent anybody other than consumers of political media. And so this contest really ends up just being a contest for viewer share, for audience. And that audience is people who want to be basically lied to believe that their investment in these questions is meaningful.
So Matt, I'm getting a word from our producer Kale that we'd like to get your take on the boat that's stuck in the Suez Canal. Any thoughts on that?
What's up with the boat?
She's beautiful. I don't know why people need to stop fat shaming her. I don't know. I don't know anything about that. I think the only thing I thought was interesting about the boat is that I read it. I don't know anything about nautical engineering, but someone said that if it was, because the claim was that it got pushed by the wind, and the claim is that it happened because it was just too big. The boats keep getting bigger, but the canal doesn't get any bigger. So the boats are taking up more space. They're more vulnerable, and I think that just speaks to the collapse of infrastructure and the failure of any kind of coordinated economic system to accommodate like global trade, because it's all being run on these ad hoc bases. I do think that if it were to somehow bring down the global economy, which it won't, but if it were, there would be something sort of poetic about a global capitalist system being killed essentially by a heart attack or like a stroke, like literally one of the arteries getting blocked, since that's a number one cause of death in the capital in the West, where all that stuff is coming.
Yeah, the boat is big. It's the pictures that got small, I guess, is the is the final thought. Matt Christman, thank you so much. Really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Check out Chapo Trap House if you haven't heard of it. It's a podcast. You know, it's like a bit, I guess.
All right. That was fun. Yeah. Let's bring other people in, including Kale. Kale, time to show your beautiful face. There he is.
The other people.
Hey, I mean everyone who's watching the show with super chats and stuff like that. This is that portion of the show. So if you have comments, questions, something you'd like to share with us, now's the time to do it, and we'll take some of your questions.
Yeah. So a couple of people have been sending in super chats, and I want to grab a couple of those right now. But like Anna said, please send us questions, and we will try to answer them live. I really like Matt's final thought on the boat. I'm glad that we asked him about the boat, just because it is like so poetic in the sense that truly is the way that change has happened historically, to confront the power of business and of capital, that you do have to find those choke points, that because everything about capitalism, corporations and capitalists are trying to make profit as fast as they can, because if they lose out, it could be death for the company. It might mean that they lose all their investments if they come up in the red. And when organized labor was at its strongest, it understood that and would organize those plants that were the choke points in a similar way to the way the canal is to trade right now. That you find the auto plants, for instance, in Detroit, that a parts plant that because of the entire car isn't being manufactured in just one plant. There's parts coming in, and then they're going out to to some other plant where it's all put together. And so if you can find the places where you can basically slow everything else down, then you're going to have a greater chance of getting the boss to come to the table with you and say, fine, what do you want? Because we have to get back to business, otherwise we all go under. And so again, the boat it's more important than we think. And I think Matt is right to say that it's poetic. Speaking of which, there was a super chat earlier. These are just my thoughts. Someone earlier was mentioning how Democratic Socialists gave FDR style and made him pass the New Deal reforms. And again, I think that's what Anna was getting at earlier. That's what Matt's getting at. That's what I was just getting at. That's what Nando's gotten at in the past. So that's what a lot of it comes down to. It's being able to force politicians' hands into doing things that are to the benefit of working people.
And can I just add to that and just talk about like the psychological, at least for me, I can't speak for everyone, but like the psychological shift that led to for me, because when you put all of your hopes into cults of personality, there's like a hopelessness that comes along with that, right? Like this feeling of not really having full control, or having any power or any control. But psychologically, once it became clearer and clearer to me that no, you can't, there are no saviors in Congress. Like there is no savior president, right? That's going to like single-handedly, unilaterally change things out of the kindness of his or her own heart. The power really lies in organized labor. That made me feel a lot more hopeful. I don't know if you guys feel the same way, because I don't know, I'm a little bit of a control freak as well. So I was like, oh, wait a minute, I do have a little bit of control. Like, obviously, no one person is going to be able to do this. It's power in numbers. It's organizing with people for a common good. But it made me feel that that's far more effective. And having that kind of power is much more desirable than relying on the whims of some congressional lawmaker or president.
Yeah, one of the things Matt has been talking about for a while, he's kind of making fun. He's kind of like an ongoing joke about holding people accountable. Like a lot of our politics is built around this idea of like we got to hold people accountable, we got to hold AOC accountable, we got to hold Biden accountable, we got to hold Mitch McConnell accountable. Like I get fundraising emails basically every day somehow because I was put on some listserv about like, let's hold Amy Klobuchar accountable, or let's hold like whatever and it just becomes like a joke. Like there's just without organized labor, there is no method to holding any of these people accountable. Like I said, like he said, like posting is not praxis, or if you think posting is practice, you can like tweet as much as you want about holding someone accountable, and nothing, it won't do anything. It's that scene in Sorry to Bother You when he was like, call your congressman. Look, there's a video of the company turning humans into horse slaves, and like people call the congressman and nothing happens.
Wow, spoiler alert, Nando. Jeez.
I think that movie is outside of the statute of limitations. If you haven't seen it, it's too bad for you. But yeah, like that idea is just, it's just empty politics. It's just an empty gesture outside of a organized labor movement. It's just not going to have any meaningful effect. They'll absorb it. They sometimes like they might like rhetorically nod to it, and they might absorb it, and they may do some sort of superficial thing here and there to nod to it, but they won't do anything meaningful to change if they are so-called held accountable by your posts.
Yeah, and by the way, like the so-called consequences get trumped up in reporting, right? Like because it's part of that reality show flavor of covering politics, right? It's nothing more than like drama. And in reality, I mean, when push comes to shove and you look at the actual substantive consequences of these lawmakers not serving the interests of their constituents, there are no real consequences. The consequences would have to come from, grassroots efforts to, apply the pressure and the consequences. And that just doesn't exist right now.
Right. yeah, we have to think about the incentive structures that exist for politicians, and then ultimately part of it just comes down to a collective action problem, meaning that like you can get a Bernie Sanders in there, you can get an AOC who, you know, there's no way to measure this, but we could just say, for sake of argument, like they genuinely do care about these issues and they will fight to the death for these things, that they're going to go down swinging. But again, you know, having just a couple people here and there that have those intentions is not going to be enough when incentive structures not only push people in the other direction, but they will actively shape people's interests. They will shape the way that you understand what you're trying to do and the limitations that it puts on those. So it's a couple things happening simultaneously, right? And we shouldn't flatten it so much to say, you know, like it just comes down to their will. Or I think the other side, that if you take some of this to the extreme and then you say they have no room to move because capital, you know, cash rules everything around me, and capital is controlling the government totally top to bottom. I mean, the thing is that that's probably more close to the truth, but the more we win, the more that we get our people in office, and the more that we have the social forces to push them in the way that we need them to be. So again, building the labor movement and accompanying social movements. You know, there's still going to be these issues of just collective action, of getting people to coordinate correctly, of trying to continuously break down those incentives and to undermine the power and influence of capital. I want to pull up another super chat from LJ, who writes, "Today's show was such a brain workout that my face is now swollen." So
like in solidarity with me.
Yeah, with Nando. Did we watch the Godzilla trailer? I didn't.
No.
All right. Thanks. No. We got a pass. Godzilla rules, though. The first one rules, and everyone should watch at least the first Godzilla.
I'm Team King Kong in that fight, you know? I mean, you got to root for King Kong, right? I mean, well, first of all, he's a primate, closer to us. And second of all, King Kong, I mean, Godzilla shoots like fire, like lasers from his mouth. You know, King Kong is outgunned. We gotta support King Kong.
I don't think you know what Godzilla is.
Godzilla shoots stuff out of his mouth.
Go watch the original one. Watch the
original, guys. Watch the original. You're such a pedantic fucking. Watch the 1920s version. You know, the Godzilla. It's known. Godzilla shoots things out of his mouth. King Kong does not. So King Kong is outgunned.
Nando, thoughts on the Champions League? And do I or Anna like soccer? Let's start with Nando.
I love the Champions League. In my opinion, it's the greatest sporting competition in the world. I think this year's Champions League is one of the weakest Champions Leagues in recent memory. It seems like all the big teams are in a state of crisis, except for Manchester City, which I suspect will probably win the Champions League. I mean, they're the best team, but the beauty about the Champions League is that you never really know, that anything can happen. It's wild, it's crazy, but Manchester City is by far the best team, mostly because every other big team is in crisis. That's my thoughts.
I don't follow soccer closely. I like athletes, but not necessarily athletic sports. I don't follow the athletic sports, but yeah, I mean, I hear my dad talk about soccer a lot, and that's about it. I don't really get into it myself.
What if, just for sake of argument, I came out like vehemently anti-soccer, just to piss off Nando?
Get a bunch of. I honestly don't. I don't care. But there's a lot of people. There's a lot of very annoying people on Twitter who will get very, very mad at you. There's a lot of people, very annoying people on Twitter who get very mad at you if you say soccer instead of football, which I always find to be, in the context of America and like with an American accent, I find it just sounds weird. I mean, football, you know, in America, like we have the other football, and you know, you just come off as like an annoying person, I think. But
you come off like someone saying that you should watch the original Godzilla.
Yeah, someone like that, just a fucking asshole like that. Yeah, exactly.
For the record, I do like soccer, although I don't follow it as closely as Nando does. But
yeah, you probably like every other Zoomer, you like soccer because you play video games and you played on FIFA, and that's like what like That's really what made soccer big in America, is the FIFA sports franchise, the highest selling video game franchise in the world.
No, I like the World Cup because I'm an Argentine nationalist. So
right.
Can I just say that, like, out of all the sports, the one that obviously I've played sports, like, for fun, not like in any team or professionally or anything like that. But like, soccer, in my opinion, is the funnest sport to play. I love it.
The beautiful game.
I think it is. I mean, I know people in America think that it's boring to watch, but I mean, it's really fun to play. And I enjoy it more than, like, I was on a softball team when I was in high school for one season because I thought I needed it to look well-rounded in my college applications. Hated it. Like, it's not for me. Not for me. Not at all. But I do enjoy soccer, playing it.
I think it is the best payoff. It just the anticipation of waiting for a goal.
The ecstasy. Yeah, I mean, and also the thing about soccer is that, like, every player on the field has to be like in some way, like, creative. Like, it's in football, in American football, like, the systems are so rigorous and so predetermined that it is devoid of some level of creativity. Of course, there are very talented players but in soccer, you can only prepare so much. At the end of the day, it's up to the players to play, and I think that's always what I find appealing about it.
Changing gears, how does working class struggle and middle class comfort form that particular hegemony that gets beyond the superficial politics discussed? LJ's feeling woeful today, and that we're shouting into a void. It's kind of true, but
yeah. I hear you, bro. You look at the material conditions and you would think, oh shit, like, people should be rising up and, overthrowing all these people. But, on some level, they did give us middle class comforts. Like, in some level, we have access to endless entertainment, which, I think is definitely has an effect on dampening, kind of, for lack of a better term, like, revolutionary fervor, where if we have Netflix, you know what I mean? Like, it does have an effect in some way, or video games, or whatever it is. So yeah, I don't know how do you do that. I guess, like, things will get bad enough where at some point it'll break, but I don't know.
Yeah, I was watching this movie. I don't know if you guys have seen it. It's that movie that Jon Stewart both wrote and directed, called Irresistible.
Oh God.
I know.
Yeah,
No. But so I was looking for, like, a brainless movie to watch while we were eating dinner last night, and so we went with that one. Something that didn't really require paying close attention, and I was actually surprised at how much. I'm not doing any spoilers, but that film poked fun at the PMC far more than I would have expected, right? And specifically, like, upper middle class, like, Democratic voters, and basically, like, why Democrats lost in 2016, and the problem with their perception of what's wrong in America, which I didn't expect it. I thought, like, the whole film was just going to be kind of like nonsense. But I think that is a problem, right? I think that there is, as Barbara Ehrenreich talks about a lot in Bait and Switch, there is this and has been this disconnect between the blue collar workers and then the managerial class. And I think the managerial class, even at this late juncture, is under the assumption that they're safe, right? That they're going to be fine. But Bait and Switch, along with all sorts of statistics that you can point to, don't bear that out. So I think the situation has to specifically get bad for them to the point where they can't really ignore it anymore, because I think that there is a divide right now continuing to play out, and it's a problem.
There's I'm in a group chat with a bunch of my old friends from Miami, and a lot of them are bankers, and they were like, there was a raging debate because there's been a lot of stories come out lately about young Goldman Sachs bankers, like, kids in their early 20s and stuff, who work for Goldman Sachs and get paid a lot of money, but, like, are being, like, worked to death, and like, are they're complaining about mental health and all that stuff, and grueling working conditions and things like that. Like, it does feel like they are even squeezing sort of some of that layer of people, and something that I was talking about with our friend of the show, Daniel Bessemer. All this stuff about, all the cancel culture that's going on, from the sort of highly educated, liberal media class people is mostly because because the capitalism isn't working for them. I mean, like look at the economics of the media industry. HuffPost just laid off 50 people or whatever. The New Republic is now going to become this like awful kind of like Democratic Party mouthpiece with this new editor. There is a sense from these people that they were promised something under the system. They took on huge amounts of debt in college to get these educations to become, take writers for BuzzFeed or whatever, and it's not working for them. It's they're precarious as hell, and they're mad as hell. So it's like a temper tantrum in a way. So I think you are seeing that the squeeze of the system is, it's like a toothpaste bottle. You gotta, it gets higher and higher and higher and higher, and it's reaching that kind of, for lack of a better term, like PMC class.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And I wanted to add to it because FT did this piece about Goldman Sachs. I don't know if you read that one, but what I found interesting about their reporting was there was one Goldman Sachs employee, a female, who was talking about how she was basically reprimanded because she didn't want to participate in the company's like ugly sweater holiday party. She didn't wear an ugly sweater or something. And so, but it was really funny because she, in her mind, the problem was I'm being discriminated against because I'm a woman, right? They think I'm not a team player because I'm not a woman. But, this is why I love Barbara Ehrenreich so much, both like in Bright-Sided and Bait and Switch. It really talks about how the corporate world wants to erase like everything about you, right? Like you have to participate in these bullshit events, right? And show that you're like a team player by engaging in these like ridiculous events and ugly sweater parties. The fake positivity, like the toxic positivity, that's not just suggested in the corporate world. Like it's a requirement. So all of this stuff, like everything that we tout in a capitalistic system, not we specifically, but supporters of this system will tout that, it's about individuality, like it's about competition, it's about innovation. But really, when you get down to it, it's not about that. Like if you look at it in a workplace, for instance, it's all about doing away with your individuality, doing away with your like legitimate human emotion and human reaction to awful working conditions. And people have been conditioned to think that if they're having a tough time at work, it's not their boss's fault. It's not the executive's fault. It's not capitalism's fault. It's their fault. They're not being positive thinking enough. They're not working hard enough. They need to take personal responsibility. And this is something that I think traditionally, impacted low-wage workers the most, but we're seeing that now impacting, the PMC. And what I hate is for anyone to think that it only has to do with identity issues. It's not about identity. I highly doubt that they went after that particular female employee at Goldman Sachs because she's a female. I guarantee you they would do the same thing if a male employee there refused to be a so-called team player by engaging in these cheesy ass events that they do. It's all about that toxic fake positivity. It's just, yeah.
Well, but I think this is basically everything that you're describing in this workplace and in many other like professional and managerial setting. I mean, and it goes all the way, obviously it goes all the way down to working people, that like the system is built on competition, and it's competition between firms. That like this is what's driving everything, because as a company, you are constantly at war with your competitors and have to maximize your profits. You have to push down your costs. And, when it's, like a fast food company, where it's low skilled, you're going to dig these people into the ground, push them as hard as you can, and like strip them of all individuality, of all decision making. You basically just take all of the mental labor out of them and just push them as hard as you can. Whereas like for professionals and this kind of PMC stratum, corporations would love to do the same thing. They have a harder time doing it because the people in the company are a little bit harder to replace, because these people have certain degrees, they have certain credentials, they have they have certain training that it's not as easy to recreate that in someone else. And that's why, when you hear all this, all this effort, all this ideology, propaganda that's going out there, like, we just need more people in STEM. We just need more people coding, because they want to de-skill you. They want to basically strip you of your unique abilities and credentials, because they need to replace you as fast as they can, or threaten you with that option so that they can destroy your life in the meantime, because they only give a shit about how hard are you working, because we paid you this much money for the day, for the week, for the month, whatever it is, and we're going to squeeze every last little drop of effort out of you. And again, it's something that if you're a working person, you know this all too well, because this is your life. And what we've seen over the last 30, 40 years is that increasingly more and more middle-class people are feeling the same squeeze, for just the same reason that Anna was describing. Like, it all fundamentally comes down to the fact that all of the most important resources, all the things that we need to live as people in a society, are controlled by blocks of capital that are in literal war against each other and are doing everything they can to make profit against each other. I think sometimes you'll hear like people say like, there's ruling class solidarity. Bullshit. They have no solidarity. They want to kill each other. Like, it's that that has to be your starting point, and recognize that like this is a war that we are the soldiers in, not by our own interests, not by our most of us would really rather not be going to a workplace that destroys our lives. It's because we have no other choice. So we have to keep going back. And that question that was asked, which I've already lost it, but the whole question of like, as middle class people, our relationship to working class struggle. I mean, I think, the unfortunate fact is that, fortunate, or I don't know what it is, but the fact is that more and more middle class people are going to be living a working class life, because they will actively, again, they will be de-skilled, they will be, under greater and greater domination by either higher up managers or their bosses. But in the meantime, I think middle class people have a moral necessity to do what they can to support working class struggles, to, again, like what we do, we produce media, we produce resources to try to help people understand the world around them, so that, they have a greater sense of what they can do to fight back. So this is what we do, but there's a million different ways. I mean, when we talked about the strike in New York with the Teamsters, DSA, New York City DSA showed up in mass on the picket line supporting them. And, it's not going to be the be all end all. That's probably not the thing that won that fight, but that is the kind of stuff that we need to do in order to, to relink our left political project that believes in universalism and egalitarianism, that believes that we should put people over profits. Linking that up with working class people and their struggles is going to take us actually engaging with those struggles and putting our resources into it, putting our lives and our effort into these things. Oh shit, there was one more I wanted to grab and I might have just lost it. And I feel horrible because it was $20.
Do you remember what the question was?
What was the
Wait, no. Yeah, I don't. Hold on. I had it and I should have screenshotted it. Whoever sent in the $20 super chat, type it in to the chat and this will be the last one. I feel horrible that I just lost. It's this technology. It deletes everything. It's all ephemeral. There's nothing lasting. You don't have to give us another $20. Just, I mean, I'm not gonna, push your hand away, but if you have the question, well, anyways,
was it the fart super chat? Someone says read the fart super chat. Was it a question about farts?
Oh, God, I hope
it wasn't
not.
even a question. It was just one statement, like fart. That's it.
Well, I guess thoughts on that until we find the other super
No,
chat.
no, let's not do that.
This is what it is. This is what it is. Sorry. Do you think people need, I believe it was this person, they were asking, do we need a savior that they can rally behind or latch onto? Should we rally behind a Bernie or a Nina Turner going forward? Thoughts on that?
I think that leadership helps. Every major revolutionary movement in the past had charismatic, strong leadership. I think the movements that lacked that ended up kind of falling apart very quickly. Lenin was a great leader. Castro, like there's just always, there's sort of examples in the past where shit actually happened. You can always point to leadership. I mean, there's, this is just not to say that like we should just sit around and wait for leaders and things like that, but I think that Bernie's leadership in the last 5 or 6 years has really done a tremendous amount of good here in the United States and in the world. I mean, I just think that that's undeniable, that his unique charisma and experience and understanding of power and how it works, that kind of combination of things really did make a difference. If you take the exact same words that he said and put it in a different figure, it would not have had the same effect. So I think that leadership definitely matters, but it's also like it's not the be all and end all, but it's just hard to think of past movements that were leaderless, that achieved anything significant.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, and again, it's those leaders that can successfully empower people, that there has to be both, like, whether it's something about the individual or the institutions that they find themselves within, like and that's something that, you try to build from the bottom up as much as you can of institutions that hold leaders accountable, but you do in fact want leadership. You just want it democratic, because any kind of, for a while the left had kind of these fantasies of everything is horizontal, there are no leaders.
Occupy.
Everything
that didn't work out well,
right? So I mean, it's you need the power of masses of people, like that's an essential part of it. But if it's completely structureless, if it has no real sense of direction, if it's not really making clear demands, and again, you can have these things be democratic, and you need them to be democratic. You don't want kind of a bureaucratization. You don't want the leadership to kind of turn into something that is, unresponsive to the people that they are supposed to be representing. And on the particular question of, Bernie or Nina, it's hard to say. I mean, I don't think we're really in a position where we can say. I think it's something that kind of has to happen somewhat more organically, that Bernie did step up and he ran his campaign in 2016 and then 2020, and people gravitated to him. And I would guess that Bernie probably wasn't someone who said, like, I want to be a leader that, like, he's not like Eugene Debs type. Like, he is a parliamentarian type. Like, he likes to get things done. He's very pragmatic about, even just right now, of like pushing, let's lower the Medicaid age. Let's, provide a public option for pharmaceuticals. Like, he's very pragmatic. That wasn't his platform, but he's going to push it because he thinks that's possible right now. And we love Bernie. We love him for that. So, I mean, will Nina Turner become that figure in the future? It's not really something that I have any qualifications to weigh in on. I don't know if any one individual does. I think it's just something that kind of happens through a process of, of campaigns and of people speaking with candidates and candidates speaking with people. And again, we want more institutions that, moving forward. Part of the problem is that it is so haphazard right now, that we want actual things that keep this process moving forward in a progressive direction. That's what we used to call labor parties around the world. And that's why, we still think that there's an important, there's a lot of value in at some point having something like an American, like, working class party that is by and for and responsive to working class people. That can then be a means of filtering in those kinds of leaders that can then push these campaigns and projects forward, but in a way that it's not all shouldered on them individually. But, again, that's what we want and that's what we need. But, then you have to get to the questions of how do we actually get there? And we try to answer some of those on this show and others, but it's really freaking hard. So.
Well, it is, yeah. I think we should wrap up though. I'm going to fight for workers like us and limit the show to 2 hours on Saturday mornings. Okay, so let's do that. Thank you, Kale, and thank you to our wonderful audience for watching and supporting the show. Please share this stream, subscribe to Jacobin's YouTube channel, and you should be subscribed to the magazine by now. Please make sure you do so if you haven't already. And Nando, any final words before we go?
No, just happy to see you. Happy to be back. It was, the break was nice, but I love doing the show, so I'm happy to be back.
Same. Love you guys. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.
All right. Bye-bye.